The rain had been falling for 3 days straight when Marcus Reid first saw the eagle. He'd been driving home from his shift at the county maintenance depot, his truck's wipers beating a rhythm against the November downpour, when something in the drainage ditch caught his eye. At first, he thought it was a bag of trash. People dumped all kinds of things along this stretch of Route 47, but as his headlights swept across it, he saw the movement. Slight, almost imperceptible, but there. Marcus pulled onto the shoulder, gravel crunching under his tires. He sat for a moment, engine idling, telling himself he didn't have time for this. His shift had run long, his back ached from hauling road debris, and the envelope from the bank was still sitting unopened on his kitchen table. The third notice. He knew what it said, but he opened the door anyway. The cold hit him first, then the rain, soaking through his work jacket before he'd taken 5 steps. He slid down the muddy embankment, his boots losing traction. And that's when he saw it clearly. A golden eagle, massive and magnificent even in its current state, lying on its side in 6 inches of muddy water. One wing was extended at an unnatural angle, and the bird's eyes, those fierce amber eyes, tracked his approach with what looked like resignation rather than fear. That's when Marcus noticed the sign. It was a piece of cardboard, disintegrating in the rain, propped against a fence post 10 feet away. He slogged through the water to read it, his heart sinking with each word. Can't afford the vet bills. Wing is broken. Too expensive to fix. Sorry. Marcus looked back at the eagle. The bird hadn't moved, hadn't tried to flee or attack. It just watched him with those ancient eyes, and in that moment, Marcus saw something he recognized, the look of something that had been given up on. He knew that look. He'd seen it in the mirror every morning for the past 2 years, ever since the accident that had cost him his contracting business, his marriage, and very nearly his life. Since he'd moved into the single-wide trailer on his sister's property, taking whatever work he could find, trying to stay sober, trying to stay alive, the logical thing would have been to call animal control. Let them handle it. Marcus had $47 in his checking account and a stack of bills he couldn't pay. He had no business taking on someone else's problem, especially one with feathers and talons and a wingspan that probably measured 6 feet. But logic had never been his strong suit. All right, big guy, Marcus said softly, approaching slowly. Let's get you out of here. Dr. Sarah Chen looked at Marcus like he'd lost his mind. Do you have any idea what you're asking? She said, standing in the fluorescent-lit exam room of her emergency veterinary clinic at 2 in the morning. The eagle lay on the steel table between them, sedated but still radiating a wild dignity. This is a golden eagle. They're federally protected. The rehabilitation costs alone will be thousands of dollars. The permits, the specialized care, the surgery. I'll figure it out, Marcus said, though he had no idea how. Sarah studied him for a long moment. She was in her 60s, with silver-streaked hair pulled back in a practical bun, and the kind eyes of someone who'd spent a lifetime caring for broken things. She'd been the vet for his family's farm animals when he was a kid, back when his parents were still alive and the farm was still theirs. You're broke, aren't you? She said finally. Marcus didn't answer, which was answer enough. Sarah sighed and turned back to the eagle, gently examining the damaged wing. The break is bad. Compound fracture. He's malnourished, dehydrated, and has a respiratory infection. Even if we can save the wing, he'll probably never fly again. Not like he should. But he'll live? If we treat him, yes, probably. Then treat him. Sarah looked at him again. And this time Marcus saw something shift in her expression. A recognition, maybe, or a memory of who he used to be before everything fell apart. I'll do the surgery, she said. You can pay me back when you're able. But Marcus, this bird is going to need months of care. Specialized housing, diet, physical therapy. This isn't a dog or a cat. This is a commitment. Marcus looked down at the eagle. Even unconscious, the bird seemed to carry itself with purpose, with meaning. Something Marcus hadn't felt in a very long time. I know, he said. The first 2 weeks were the hardest. Marcus converted his sister's old hay barn into a temporary mews, following the specifications Sarah had given him. He built a perch from weathered fence posts, installed proper lighting, and covered the floor with sand and pine shavings. He used lumber scraps and his own 2 hands, working by lantern light after his maintenance shifts, his breath fogging in the December cold. His sister Beth brought him coffee one evening, watching him work. "You know people are going to think you've completely lost it," she said. "Let them. Marcus." She set the thermos down on his makeshift workbench. "I love that you're doing this." "Really, I do. But you can barely take care of yourself right now. How are you going to take care of him?" It was a fair question. Marcus hadn't told her about the bank notices or the fact that he'd been skipping meals to afford the Eagles' specialized food. He hadn't told her about the nightmares that still woke him up at 3 in the morning, or the way his hands sometimes shook when he thought about having a drink. "I don't know," he admitted, "but I have to try." Beth was quiet for a moment. "What are you going to call him?" Marcus hadn't thought about it. He looked at the empty mews, imagining the eagle inside, healing, growing strong again. "Sentinel," he said finally. "His name is Sentinel." The eagle came home on a gray Tuesday morning. Sarah's assistant helped Marcus carry the transport crate into the mews, and together they carefully transferred Sentinel to his new perch. The bird's wing was wrapped, supported by a specialized brace that would need to be adjusted weekly. He looked smaller somehow, diminished by injury and captivity, but his eyes were clear and alert. "Talk to him," Sarah advised, "every day. Let him get used to your voice, your presence. Build trust slowly." So Marcus talked. He talked while he prepared Sentinel's food, mice and quail that Sarah provided, teaching Marcus how to handle them properly. He talked while he cleaned the mews, while he adjusted the lighting and temperature, while he sat on an overturned bucket in the corner and watched the eagle watch him back. He told Sentinel about the farm he'd grown up on, about learning carpentry from his father, about building his business from nothing and watching it crumble. He talked about the accident, a moment of carelessness on a job site that had sent him falling 2 stories onto concrete, and the pain medication that had turned into something darker. He talked about his ex-wife's patience running out, about moving into the trailer, about the shame of being 42 years old and having nothing to show for it. "Guess we're both starting over," he said one evening, a week after Sentinel had arrived. "Neither of us quite what we used to be." The eagle shifted on his perch, his good wing rustling slightly. And for just a moment, Marcus could have sworn he saw understanding in those amber eyes. The transformation began so gradually that Marcus almost didn't notice it. It started with his sleep. The nightmares that had plagued him for 2 years began to fade, replaced by deeper, dreamless rest. He woke earlier, feeling more alert. The constant ache in his back, a souvenir from the accident, seemed to diminish. At first, he attributed it to routine, having a purpose, a schedule, something to care for besides his own misery. But then other things began to change. His hands stopped shaking. The cravings that used to hit him at odd hours, driving past the liquor store, seeing a beer commercial, simply disappeared. He started eating regularly again, his appetite returning. The fog that had hung over his thoughts for so long began to lift, and he found himself thinking more clearly, planning ahead, seeing possibilities instead of just problems. Sarah noticed it during one of Sentinel's checkups. "You look different," she said, studying Marcus as he held the eagle steady for her examination. "Healthier." "When's the last time you had a drink?" Marcus had to stop and think. 6 weeks, he realized. "I haven't even thought about it." Sarah's hands paused in their work. She looked at Sentinel, then back at Marcus. "That's remarkable." "It's the routine," Marcus said. "Having something to focus on." But Sarah's expression suggested she wasn't entirely convinced that was all it was. The eagle's wing healed faster than expected. By February, Sentinel was doing short practice flights in the mews, his movements still stiff, but gaining strength daily. And something else was happening, something Marcus couldn't quite explain. He felt calmer in the eagle's presence, more centered. When he sat with Sentinel in the evenings, reading or just being quiet, he felt a kind of peace he hadn't known since before the accident. One night, unable to sleep, Marcus sat in the mews with just the moonlight filtering through the high windows. Sentinel was on his perch, head tucked under his good wing. Marcus was thinking about the bank notice he'd finally opened that day, the foreclosure warning, trying to figure out what came next. The eagle's head emerged from beneath his wing. In the dim light, those amber eyes found Marcus, held him, and somehow, impossibly, Marcus felt the weight in his chest begin to ease. Not disappear, but lighten, become bearable. He slept in the mews that night, wrapped in an old blanket, and woke feeling more rested than he had in years. Tom Whitfield showed up on a Saturday morning in March. Marcus was in the mews working with Sentinel on his flight exercises when he heard the knock. He found a man in his 70s standing at the barn door, leaning on a carved walking stick, his weathered face creased with curiosity. "Heard you had an eagle," Tom said by way of introduction. "Name's Tom Whitfield. Run the veterans group over at the community center." Marcus invited him in, suddenly self-conscious about the makeshift nature of his operation. But Tom's eyes lit up when he saw Sentinel. "Magnificent," he breathed. "Haven't seen a golden this close since I was stationed in Alaska." He told Marcus about his time in the military, about the eagles he'd seen there, about coming home broken from Vietnam and spending years trying to find his way back to himself. "I heard about what you did," Tom said, pulling him out of that ditch, nursing him back. "People in town are talking about it." Marcus felt his face flush. "It's not that big a deal, isn't it?" Tom stepped closer to Sentinel's perch, and the eagle regarded him with what looked like interest rather than aggression. "I work with vets dealing with PTSD, traumatic brain injuries, addiction. Some of them are in pretty rough shape. We've tried everything: therapy, medication, support groups. Sometimes it helps, sometimes it doesn't." He turned to Marcus. "But I've seen what happens when someone who's struggling finds a purpose, something outside themselves to care for. And I've seen what animals can do for people who've lost their way." Marcus thought about his own transformation, the inexplicable peace he felt around Sentinel. "What are you suggesting?" "Let me bring some of the guys out here, just to visit, to see him. No pressure, no agenda, just see what happens." Marcus hesitated. He wasn't sure he was ready to share Sentinel with anyone else, wasn't sure the eagle was ready for visitors. But something in Tom's eyes, hope, maybe, or recognition of a kindred spirit, made him nod. "Okay," he said, "we can try." The first veteran Tom brought was a young man named David Cruz. He was 26 but looked older, with dark circles under his eyes and a jumpiness that spoke of sleepless nights and constant vigilance. He'd done 3 tours in Afghanistan and come home with PTSD so severe he couldn't hold a job or maintain relationships. Tom explained all this in a quiet voice before David arrived, and Marcus felt his stomach tighten with worry. What if this didn't work? What if Sentinel reacted badly? What if he made things worse? But when David stepped into the mews, something shifted. The young man stopped just inside the door, his eyes finding Sentinel on his perch. The eagle turned his head, studying this new visitor with those penetrating amber eyes. For a long moment, nobody moved. Then David took a slow step forward, then another. "He's beautiful," David whispered. Marcus watched as David approached the perch, moving with a caution that seemed more like reverence than fear. Sentinel remained still, allowing the proximity in a way that surprised Marcus. The eagle was usually more guarded with strangers. David stood there for almost an hour, barely speaking, just watching Sentinel. Marcus stayed in the background, giving them space, and he saw something remarkable happen. The tension in David's shoulders gradually released. His breathing, which had been quick and shallow when he arrived, slowed and deepened. The constant scanning of exits and corners that Marcus had noticed, hypervigilance, Tom had called it, faded away. When David finally turned to leave, there were tears on his face. "Can I come back?" he asked. "Any time," Marcus said. David came back the next day, and the day after that. Within 2 weeks, he was helping Marcus with the daily care, preparing food, cleaning the mews, maintaining equipment. He started sleeping better. The nightmares, he confided, were becoming less frequent. He was considering going back to school. "I don't know what it is," David said one evening as they watched Sentinel practice his flights. "But when I'm here with him, everything just quiets down. The noise in my head, the memories, all of it. It gets quiet." Marcus understood exactly what he meant. Word spread through Tom's network, then beyond it. More veterans came. Then others. A woman recovering from a traumatic car accident, a teenager dealing with severe anxiety, a middle-aged teacher who'd lost her husband to cancer and couldn't find her way back to living. They came hesitantly at first, brought by Tom or Sarah, or simply hearing about the Eagle from someone who'd visited. And Sentinel welcomed them all. The Eagle seemed to understand. Somehow, who needed him most? He would remain calm and still for someone in crisis, his presence somehow soothing. He would become more animated, more playful even, for someone who needed a spark of joy. Marcus watched in amazement as the bird he'd rescued became a healer in his own right, offering something that medication and therapy couldn't quite reach. Beth helped Marcus expand the operation. They converted more of the barn into a proper space, adding benches, a small kitchenette for making tea, bookshelves with titles on trauma recovery and finding hope. Tom secured a grant from a veterans organization to help with costs. Sarah provided medical supplies and advice, often donating her services. The community, Marcus discovered, was full of people ready to help once they saw what was happening. By summer, Marcus had created a proper program. He called it Second Chances Sanctuary, and it operated on a simple principle. Anyone who needed peace, who needed a moment of connection with something wild and free and healing, was welcome. Marcus documented everything in a journal Sarah had given him, not for publication or recognition, but to remember. He wrote about David, who'd enrolled in community college and was studying to be a counselor, about Patricia, the accident survivor who'd spent 3 months visiting Sentinel every day and gradually rebuilt her confidence enough to drive again, about 17-year-old Sophie, whose anxiety had been so severe she couldn't attend school, who now volunteered at the sanctuary every weekend and was thriving. He wrote about Tom, who'd become both mentor and friend, teaching Marcus about grant writing and nonprofit structure, sharing his own stories of recovery and redemption. But mostly, he wrote about Sentinel. The Eagle's wing had healed, though not perfectly. He could fly, but not with the power and grace he'd once possessed. He would never return to the wild, would never hunt the mountain thermals or claim a mate. In any other context, it would be a tragedy. Instead, it had become his purpose. The breakthrough with Marcus's understanding of what was happening came on a stormy night in August. A young mother named Lisa had brought her 6-year-old son, Jacob, to the sanctuary. The boy had been in foster care before Lisa had adopted him, and he carried trauma that manifested in selective mutism and intense emotional dysregulation. He hadn't spoken in 3 months. It was Marcus's evening to close up, and Lisa was desperate, having driven 2 hours after hearing about Sentinel from her therapist. Marcus almost turned her away. It was late, the weather was terrible, but something stopped him. He let them in. Jacob was small for his age, with wide, dark eyes that took in everything and revealed nothing. He stood in the doorway of the mews, frozen, while thunder rumbled outside. Sentinel was on his perch, ruffled and agitated by the storm. Then the boy took a step forward, and another. He walked straight to Sentinel's perch, ignoring his mother's worried calls, and stopped just beyond arm's reach. The Eagle and the boy looked at each other, and Marcus felt the air in the mews change, become charged with something he couldn't name. "Broken," Jacob whispered, his first word in 3 months. His mother gasped. Marcus held very still. Jacob reached out one small hand, not quite touching Sentinel's feathers. "You were broken too," the boy said, his voice gaining strength. "But you're not anymore. You're strong. You're helping people." Tears were streaming down Lisa's face. Marcus felt his own eyes burning. "Can I be like you?" Jacob asked the Eagle. "Can I be strong and help people?" Sentinel shifted on his perch, lowered his head slightly, and made a soft sound Marcus had never heard him make before, almost a coo. Gentle and reassuring. "Yes," Marcus said quietly, answering for the Eagle, answering for himself. "You can." The article in the regional newspaper came out in September, followed by a segment on the local news. Marcus hadn't sought the attention. A reporter had heard about the sanctuary from someone in Tom's veterans group. But once the stories ran, everything changed. Donations poured in. Volunteers appeared. A local construction company offered to build a proper facility free of charge. The bank, seeing the community support, worked with Marcus to restructure his debt. His sister Beth quit her job at the insurance company to help run the sanctuary full-time. "Do you realize what you've built here?" she asked him one evening as they sat on the porch of what used to be his trailer and was now the sanctuary office. Sentinel was visible through the barn window, outlined against the sunset, wings spread in his evening stretch. Marcus thought about the question. He'd built more than a facility for an injured eagle. He'd built a place where broken things could heal, including himself. The angry, lost, self-destructive man who'd pulled a dying eagle from a ditch 11 months ago barely existed anymore. In his place was someone Marcus was still getting to know, someone with purpose, with direction, with hope. "I think Sentinel built it," Marcus said finally. "I just followed his lead." But even as he said it, he knew it wasn't quite true. They'd built it together, the broken man and the broken eagle, each saving the other in ways that had nothing to do with medicine or shelter, and everything to do with giving each other a reason to heal. The formal dedication of the new facility happened on a crisp October morning, exactly 1 year after Marcus had found Sentinel. The timber frame building stood where the old hay barn had been, with proper mews for Sentinel, a gathering space for visitors, offices for the growing staff, and room to expand. Over 100 people attended the dedication. Veterans, trauma survivors, families who'd visited the sanctuary, community members who'd donated time or money or both. Sarah Chen cut the ribbon. Tom Whitfield gave a speech about the power of second chances. David Cruz, now a peer counselor and sanctuary volunteer coordinator, talked about what the place had meant to him. Young Jacob, who came every week with his mother and was now thriving in school, read a poem he'd written about eagles and healing. But the moment that stuck with Marcus came later, when the crowds had dispersed and the sun was setting in bands of orange and purple across the western sky. He stood alone in Sentinel's new mews, spacious and well-appointed, everything an injured eagle could need, and watched as the bird moved along his perch, testing the new space. The eagle's wing was still imperfect. His flight still limited, but he moved with confidence now, with purpose. "Thank you," Marcus said quietly. Sentinel turned those amber eyes on him, and Marcus felt it again, that sense of peace, of rightness, of everything coming together in a way he never could have planned or predicted. He thought about the man he'd been a year ago, desperate, defeated, seeing no way forward. He thought about all the logical reasons he should have left that eagle in the ditch, should have let someone else handle it, should have focused on his own problems instead of taking on someone else's. Thank God he hadn't been logical, because in saving Sentinel, he'd saved himself. And in creating a sanctuary for an injured eagle, he'd created a sanctuary for hundreds of injured souls, including his own. The eagle made a soft sound, that same gentle coo he'd made for Jacob, and stretched his wings as far as they would go. Not perfect, not whole, but healed enough. Strong enough, more than enough. Outside, the first stars were appearing in the darkening sky. Tomorrow, more people would come seeking peace, seeking hope, seeking whatever it was that Sentinel offered through his patient presence and those knowing amber eyes. Tomorrow, Marcus would help them find it, would continue building this impossible thing he'd stumbled into creating. But tonight, he just stood with the eagle in the gathering darkness, two rescued souls keeping each other company, and felt grateful for second chances, for both of them. The weight he'd carried for so long was gone. In its place was something he'd forgotten he could feel, the lightness of wings, the possibility of flight, the knowledge that sometimes salvation comes not from being unbroken, but from learning to live with purpose despite the fractures. Sometimes, Marcus had learned the most broken things make the best healers, because they understand the weight of what it takes to survive, and sometimes the only way to save yourself is to save someone else first. Second chances. Sanctuary continues to operate today, serving over 500 visitors annually. Sentinel lived for 8 more years after his rescue, touching countless lives before passing peacefully in his sleep at the age of 19. His legacy continues through the expanded sanctuary, which now includes multiple rescued raptors and serves veterans, trauma survivors, and at-risk youth throughout the region. Marcus Reid, now 52, remains the sanctuary's director and still tells anyone who will listen that he didn't save the eagle. The eagle saved him.